A new CBS News poll is giving insight on where Americans stand on the immigration debate. It shows that the vast majority of Americans are in favor of letting dreamers stay in the U.S. Those are immigrants who, of course, were brought to the country illegally as children. But Americans are divided over whether the issue is worth risking an entire government shutdown. CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, is here to break down all the polls. So, Anthony, when you talk about DACA and a government shutdown, where do folks stand on this? Yeah,
that large number, that 87% that you just showed, that's pretty unusual in this day and age, in this very partisan environment, because you see a big number of Republicans and a big number of Democrats and independents, too, all in favor of the idea behind DACA, right? Where the split comes, even within the parties, is, okay, what are you willing to do to get it? So we asked folks that, and among Democrats who support DACA, a little more than half say that they'd be willing to risk a government shutdown in order to get something like DACA. Are you surprised?
So Americans are saying it's okay if the government shuts down. We want to get this issue resolved.
You know, that's a really interesting question, because when you measure this, part of it is people saying this issue is really important to me. And part of it is people making a policy calculus. It's this, this idea versus what actually comes out of a government shutdown. And I think part of that only gets answered if one actually happens, where they see the effects and then they get to weigh one against the other. There hasn't been one in quite a few years, and not all of them have the same impact. Then you look at Republicans, too, and this is interesting. Republicans, of course, do not say that it's worth shutting down the government to get DACA, but a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them, when we ask if there ought to be a border wall, and that, of course, is part of these negotiations, funding for the border wall, well, a lot of them say, yes, they'd be willing to risk a government shutdown. Republicans to get a border wall. So you see there's a lot of brinksmanship there. There's a lot of feeling in the public. But again, part of this, I think, is really measuring, as a pollster, just intensity of feeling about the issue as much as it is actual policy trade-offs.
You know, we're almost 1 year into this presidency. I'm curious about the approval ratings for President Trump, and in particular, how does he compare to past presidents?
Yeah, the first thing to know, and you and I have been sitting here all year sort of talking about this, is that his ratings are historically low for a first-term president, but they're also historically stable. They haven't moved as much from their highest point to their lowest point as other presidents who've seen much more bouncing around in the first year.
George W. Bush, 82%? That's incredibly high, no?
He went up very high after 9/11. So, I mean, that's a lesson. There are external things that happen, and the president's handling of them. I mean, Americans obviously overwhelmingly approved of how he handled that. But even without, tragedies or things like that, there are places where a president, first year, especially as the country is sort of getting to know them, tend to bounce around. This president has not seen that, and there's a reason for it. It tells you a story about partisanship. Republicans have underpinned his support. There have been 8 in 10 or more Republicans saying they like what he's doing, but almost no one else. So he's got underwater, under 50% approval ratings from independents, and then very low, historically low opinion ratings from the opposite party, in this case, the Democrats. That tells you a story about partisanship in the United States today. It also tells you, if you talk to our respondents, that a lot of them who don't already support the president feel like he has not reached out to them. In fact, some of them say they feel disrespected. They feel like they don't have a voice in a lot of our other polling.
These are people who don't support him.
People who don't support him, and so they feel like not only, and they don't necessarily expect him to have every policy position that they like, but they also don't feel like they're participating, like they're being, their opinions are being sought, and that's something we've gotten back from people throughout the year.
The economy, Anthony, is doing so well. So wouldn't someone like President Trump say, why aren't my approval ratings better? The economy is doing well. Yeah,
great question. And we have often seen in the past that the president's approval ratings and feelings about the economy have been highly correlated, right? This president is being evaluated, people tell us, on a different set of measures. Because even people who say the economy is good, even people who say, yeah, we think manufacturing jobs are coming back, are telling us that they're looking at the way the president handles himself personally. And they're looking at things they don't like the tweeting. They're looking at things like I mentioned, that they feel like he's not listening to other voices besides those who already agree with him. And they're judging him on that, they tell us, more than what happens to the economy, even when they give him some credit for what's happening to the economy. So there's a change in how people think, not just what they think, that we've seen. Sort of one more change in a year of a lot of changes.
Yeah, that is pretty significant to see the difference, that they can separate the economy and his personal.
Yeah, and there's sort of a second beat to this too, which jumps out at me from this poll, and that is a lot of folks say they don't feel like they're being personally helped by his policies. So they think the economy in general is doing well. We've seen this a lot. There's the larger state, but what happens to you? What happens to your pocketbook? What happens to your wallet? And on that measure, folks say that hasn't affected them yet. So only 1 in 5 think that the president's policies specifically have helped them, and I think that's holding them down too.
What about the Russia investigation? It's always making headlines in some form or another. How is that resonating with his base and with the rest of the American public?
Well, most people, including a lot of Republicans, say that they would like to see the president play this out and cooperate.
Even Republicans?
Even Republicans. Now, there's going to be different reasons for that. Republicans have felt that there is nothing going on there, and so you connect the dots and you say, well, if things sort of play out, the investigation goes along, the president cooperates, then the truth will come out, and they believe that will clear the president and his team. Democrats, of course, want to see this play out, and they think something more nefarious has been going on. They tell us that in the polling, so they want to see that as well. But across the board, people do want to see this play out and let the investigation continue, and we find really big numbers for that too.
Both sides of the aisle. It's hard to find anything on both sides of the aisle resonating. Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Rena.